The sound of Maya's voice cutting through the house like a blade made me pause with my wrench halfway to the carburetor. My 17-year-old daughter had inherited her mother's gift for delivering devastating truths with surgical precision. But tonight, she was using it against Raina instead of me. If you loved Dad, you wouldn't need to sneak around with your boss anymore. Maya's voice carried down to my garage workshop. You're not even trying to hide it, Mom. I set the wrench down carefully on my workbench, the metal clicking against the scarred wood surface. 23 years of marriage, and this was how I found out. Not through some dramatic confrontation or tearful confession, but through my teenager calling out her mother's lies while I worked on Mrs. Henderson's ancient Buick. Love is grand, I thought, but a hotel keycard says it with more style. Raina's response was too quiet to hear, but Maya's wasn't. Whatever, Mom. Just don't expect me to pretend everything's perfect when Dad finds out. The front door slammed hard enough to rattle the tools hanging on my pegboard. Maya's footsteps thundered up the stairs, followed by the inevitable crash of her bedroom door. Another evening in the Carven household, brought to you by family dysfunction and corporate ambition. I wiped my hands on an old shop rag and looked around my garage. This was my kingdom, a cluttered, oil-stained sanctuary filled with diagnostic computers, pneumatic lifts, and the honest smell of motor oil and metal shavings. Out here, problems had solutions. Engines either ran or they didn't. Parts either fit or they needed replacement. Simple. Unlike my wife's increasingly complicated schedule of late meetings, weekend conferences, and business trips that seemed to multiply like rabbits every month. The garage door connecting to the house creaked open, and Raina appeared in her tailored gray suit, looking like she'd stepped out of a corporate magazine. At 37, she still turned heads when she walked into a room, all sharp cheekbones and calculating green eyes. Tonight, those eyes held the particular brand of forced cheerfulness she reserved for damage control. "Brooks, honey," she said, her voice carrying that slight tremor that meant she was working hard to sound casual. "I need to talk to you about tomorrow night." I kept my attention on the engine block in front of me, threading a bolt with deliberate slowness. "What about tomorrow night?" "The company awards gala, remember? I mentioned it last week." Actually, she'd mentioned it 3 times last week, twice this week, and left a sticky note on the bathroom mirror yesterday. Raina had many talents, but subtlety wasn't one of them. When she wanted something, she hammered at it until resistance became more exhausting than compliance. Right, the thing where you get an award for excellence in marketing manipulation. "It's the Innovation in Digital Strategy Award," she corrected, missing my sarcasm entirely. "And I really need you there, Brooks. It's important for my career." I looked up from the engine, meeting her eyes for the first time since she'd walked in. "Important how? Are the other corporate wives going to judge you for showing up alone?" Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or irritation at being seen through so easily. "It's not like that. This is a big night for me, and I want my husband there to support me." The word husband came out with just a little too much emphasis, like she was reminding herself what I was supposed to be to her. I'd been Brooks, the husband, for 23 years, Brooks the provider, Brooks the reliable one who fixed things and asked few questions. But lately, I'd started to wonder if I'd been demoted to Brooks the convenient excuse, Brooks the cover story, Brooks the useful idiot who made her look respectable. "Fine," I said, turning back to the engine. "I'll dust off my good shirt and pretend to care about quarterly projections." "Thank you." She hesitated in the doorway, and I could feel her watching me. "Brooks, are we okay?" The question hung in the air between us like exhaust fumes. Were we okay? That depended on how you defined okay. If okay meant going through the motions of marriage while she conducted whatever was happening with her boss, then sure, we were fantastic. "We're fine, Raina. Just tired." She left without another word, and I went back to work on the Buick. But my hands weren't as steady as they'd been before, and the simple satisfaction of mechanical work felt hollow. Maya's words kept echoing in my head. Sneaking around with your boss. Callum Torvin. I'd met Raina's boss exactly twice, both times at company functions where he'd made a point of praising my wife's dedication and long hours. He was the kind of man who wore success like expensive cologne, noticeable from across the room and slightly suffocating up close. Late 40s, silver at the temples, the sort of confident smile that came from never having to worry about money or consequences. The kind of man who could offer my wife things I never could. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I finished the carburetor work and cleaned my tools, going through the familiar ritual of shutting down the shop for the night. But my mind was elsewhere, turning over fragments of conversations, unexplained absences, and the growing distance between Raina and me that had opened up like a sinkhole in the middle of our marriage. Tomorrow night's gala suddenly felt like more than just another corporate event. It felt like a test, though I wasn't sure yet who was being tested or what the passing grade might be. I turned off the garage lights and headed into the house, where the silence felt heavier than usual. Maya's music thumped through her bedroom ceiling, and light leaked from under Raina's home office door. Just another evening in suburbia, where everyone stayed in their separate corners and pretended everything was normal. But normal was about to become a luxury I couldn't afford. The next evening, I stood in front of our bedroom mirror, adjusting a tie I hadn't worn in 6 months. The face looking back at me was 39 years old, marked by crow's feet and the kind of permanent 5 o'clock shadow that came from working with my hands for a living. Not exactly corporate executive material, but it was the face Raina had married, back when she was still impressed by a man who could fix anything that broke. "You clean up nice," Raina said from behind me, and I caught her reflection in the mirror. She'd chosen a black dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments, her hair pulled back in a style that showed off the diamond earrings I'd given her for our anniversary 2 years ago. She looked beautiful. She also looked like she was preparing for something more significant than a company awards ceremony. "Thanks. You look good too." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Ready to go? We don't want to be late." The gala was being held at the Riverside Grand, one of those hotels that tried to compensate for a lack of actual character with an abundance of marble and crystal chandeliers. The ballroom was full of people I didn't know, all of them speaking the peculiar language of corporate success, synergy and paradigm shifts, and leveraging core competencies. I got myself a drink and found a spot near the wall where I could watch the proceedings without having to participate in conversations about quarterly projections. Raina had been absorbed into a cluster of her colleagues within minutes of our arrival, leaving me to observe the strange mating rituals of middle management. That's when I spotted Callum Torvin working the room like a politician at a fundraiser. He moved from group to group with practiced ease, dispensing handshakes and smiles with the efficiency of a man who'd turned charm into a business strategy. When he reached Raina's circle, I watched him place his hand on her lower back in a gesture that lasted just a fraction too long to be purely professional. She didn't move away. I finished my drink and got another one, keeping my attention on the little drama playing out across the room. Callum's hand found reasons to touch Raina's arm when he spoke to her. She leaned in closer than necessary when he whispered something that made her laugh. They had the easy intimacy of people who'd spent time together away from crowds, away from witnesses, away from husbands. The award ceremony itself was a blur of speeches and applause. Raina's name was called, and she walked to the podium with the confident stride of someone who'd been expecting this moment. Her acceptance speech hit all the right notes: gratitude to her team, dedication to innovation, commitment to excellence. She looked poised and professional and completely in her element. She also looked like a stranger. After the formal program ended, the crowd broke up into smaller groups for networking and cocktails. I was contemplating another drink when Callum appeared beside me, his smile as polished as his cufflinks. "Brooks, right? Raina's husband. Great to see you again." "Callum." I shook his offered hand, noting the firm grip and manicured nails. "Congratulations on having such a talented employee. Raina's exceptional, absolutely exceptional. I don't know what I'd do without her." He paused, and something shifted in his expression. "She puts in so many long hours, stays so dedicated to the work. I hope you don't mind sharing her with the company." The words were innocent enough, but there was something underneath them, a challenge, or maybe just the smug satisfaction of a man who thought he was cleverer than everyone around him. I smiled back, matching his tone exactly. "Oh, I don't mind sharing at all, Callum, as long as everyone knows what they're sharing." His smile flickered, just for a moment, but he recovered quickly. "Of course. Well, I should get back to the networking. You know how these things are." "Sure do." He started to walk away, then turned back as if he'd just remembered something. "Oh, Raina mentioned she might need to stay late tonight. Some follow-up meetings with the team. You know how it is." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a plastic keycard, the kind hotels used for room access. The movement was casual, practiced, like he'd done it many times before. He pressed the card into my palm with another one of those confident smiles. "Just in case she needs to reach me, room 1247. I looked down at the keycard, then back up at Callum's face. He was still smiling, but there was something else there now, a sort of territorial satisfaction, like a dog marking his property. He thought he was being clever, letting me know about the room without saying anything directly. Plausible deniability wrapped up in corporate speak. What he didn't realize was that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. "Thanks," I said, slipping the keycard into my pocket. "I'll make sure she gets this if she needs it." "Great. Well, enjoy the rest of the evening, Brooks." He walked away, rejoining a group of executives near the bar. I watched him go, my hand still in my pocket, fingers wrapped around the piece of plastic that had just changed everything. The rest of the evening passed in a haze of forced conversation and careful observation. I watched Raina work the room, watched Callum watch her, watched the little glances and subtle signals that passed between them. By the time we got to the car, I had a pretty clear picture of what my marriage had become. "How was that for you?" Raina asked as we pulled out of the hotel parking lot. "Educational," I said. She glanced at me sideways. "What do you mean?" "Just interesting to see you in your element. You looked very comfortable up there." "Thanks. I've worked hard for this recognition." "I'm sure you have." We drove home in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When we got to the house, Raina went straight to her office, claiming she had emails to catch up on. I headed down to my workshop, but instead of working on engines, I sat at my computer and started learning everything I could about electronic keycards. It turns out that hotel security systems aren't nearly as sophisticated as people think. Most keycards use simple magnetic strips or RFID chips that can be read and duplicated with the right equipment. And I had the right equipment: diagnostic computers, card readers, programming software. Tools of the trade for someone who worked on modern vehicles with their electronic locks and smart key systems. By 3 a.m, I'd figured out how to clone Callum's keycard and reprogram the access codes. By 4, I'd used his own card to lock him out of his hotel room, his office, his parking garage, and his private executive bathroom. Every electronic lock that recognized his access codes had been reset to reject them. At 4:23 a.m., Raina's phone started buzzing with text messages. I lay in bed listening to her whispered phone conversation through the thin wall between our bedroom and her office. Callum was panicking, locked out of everything, unable to understand how his access codes had suddenly stopped working. Raina was trying to calm him down, promising to call hotel security, suggesting he contact the IT department first thing in the morning. I smiled in the dark and went to sleep. The next morning, Raina was distracted and irritable, jumping every time her phone rang. She left for work earlier than usual, claiming she had to help sort out some technical difficulties at the office. I kissed her goodbye and told her to have a good day, my voice carrying just enough innocent concern to make her look at me twice. After she left, I sat in my workshop with a cup of coffee and Callum's Keycard, turning the piece of plastic over in my fingers. Such a small thing to cause so much chaos. But that was just the beginning. I'd spent 23 years being Brooks, the reliable husband, Brooks the provider, Brooks the man who fixed things quietly and asked few questions. But I'd also spent those years learning skills that my wife and her boss had never bothered to notice or understand. Electronics, security systems, computer programming, social engineering, all tools of the modern automotive trade. All tools that could be used for other purposes. Raina wanted to play games with keycards and secret meetings? Fine. But she was about to discover that her husband knew how to play games too. And unlike her, I played to win. The keycard went into my workbench drawer, right next to my collection of electronic diagnostic tools and programming cables. Tomorrow, I'd start teaching Callum Torvin and my wife exactly what happened when you underestimated Brooks Carven. But tonight, I had planning to do. The beauty of being underestimated is that people tell you things they shouldn't, assuming you're too simple to understand the implications. Over the next few days, I became a student of my wife's routines, her phone calls, her carefully constructed lies. Raina thought she was being clever with her explanations for late nights and weekend meetings, client presentations that ran long, strategy sessions that couldn't wait until Monday, emergency consultations that required her immediate attention, each excuse delivered with the practiced sincerity of someone who'd been rehearsing them for months. What she didn't know was that I'd installed a small device in her car that tracked her movements. Nothing illegal or invasive, just a simple GPS logger that I'd originally bought to track down a stolen truck from my shop. The device painted a very different picture of her schedule than the one she'd been sharing with me. Tuesday. Late meeting with the Henderson account. Actually, at the Riverside Grand from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. Thursday. Team building dinner with the marketing department. Actually at Callum's apartment building from 6 p.m. to midnight. Saturday. Emergency presentation prep at the office. Actually at a boutique hotel across town from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m. I started keeping a log, documenting each lie with the methodical precision I brought to diagnosing engine problems, symptoms, causes, patterns. The data told a story that was both predictable and infuriating. My wife was having an affair, and she thought I was too stupid to notice. The second phase of Callum's education began on a Wednesday morning. I'd spent the previous evening researching his daily routine through social media posts and corporate announcements. The man couldn't resist documenting his success. Photos of his morning coffee at the executive cafe, updates about his workout schedule, check-ins at expensive restaurants and exclusive clubs. He was as predictable as a German engine and twice as arrogant. At 7:30 a.m., Callum would arrive at his reserved parking spot in the executive garage beneath his office building. The garage used the same electronic access system as his hotel, which meant his reprogrammed keycard would get him into the building, but wouldn't let him back out. I was waiting in the shadows between two concrete pillars when his silver Porsche pulled into the spot. Callum climbed out, checking his phone with the distracted air of a man whose biggest worry was choosing which restaurant to patronize for lunch. "Callum," I called out, stepping into the light. He looked up, startled, then forced his expression into something resembling polite surprise. "Brooks, what are you doing here?" "Had a delivery in the area. Thought I'd stop by and see how you're settling in after your security troubles the other night." His face tightened almost imperceptibly. "Oh, that. Just a glitch in the system. These things happen. Sure they do. I walked closer, noting how his posture shifted as I entered his personal space. Must have been frustrating, though, being locked out of your own room. It was inconvenient. He glanced around the garage, probably looking for security cameras or witnesses. But like I said, these things happen. They sure do. I smiled and pulled out my phone. Speaking of things that happen, you might want to check your car. He frowned, then looked back at his Porsche. The driver's side door was hanging open at an odd angle, and there was something wrong with the way it was positioned. He moved closer, then stopped when he realized what he was seeing. The door's hydraulic hinge system had been reprogrammed to close with about 10 times the normal force. When he'd gotten out of the car, the door had slammed shut on his briefcase, which was now thoroughly crushed between the door and the frame. What the? He grabbed the door handle and tried to pull it open. The hydraulic system resisted, designed to prevent damage from excessive force. What did you do? Me? I just got here. I held up my hands in mock innocence. Must be another one of those glitches. You know how temperamental these German engineering systems can be. He yanked harder on the door handle, his face flushing with frustration and embarrassment. The briefcase was completely destroyed, its contents scattered across the car's interior. His laptop was visible through the window, its screen cracked from the impact. This isn't a glitch, he said, turning to face me. You did something to my car. That's a serious accusation, Callum. Do you have any proof? He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to work out the angles. He couldn't prove anything, couldn't even explain how I might have accessed his car in a secured garage. But he knew. And more importantly, he knew that I knew about him and Raina. The balance of power had shifted, and we both felt it. Stay away from my car, he said finally. Of course, wouldn't want any more glitches. I started walking toward the exit, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Callum? You might want to have someone look at that hydraulic system. Could be dangerous if it malfunctions at the wrong time. I left him there, struggling with his damaged car and trying to figure out how his perfectly ordered world had suddenly become so unpredictable. That evening, Raina came home later than usual, her mood somewhere between frustrated and confused. She'd spent the day dealing with Callum's crisis, his inability to access various parts of the building, his damaged car, his growing paranoia about technical malfunctions that seemed to follow him around. Rough day? I asked, looking up from the newspaper. You could say that. Callum's having some kind of security issues at work. I think someone might be targeting him. Really? That's terrible. Any idea who would do something like that? She shook her head, but there was something in her expression that made me think she was starting to connect dots she didn't want to connect. Probably just a disgruntled employee or something. You know how corporate politics can get. Sure do. People can be pretty creative when they feel like they've been wronged. She looked at me sharply, but I kept my attention on the newspaper, my expression as neutral as I could make it. After a moment, she headed upstairs to change clothes, her phone already buzzing with what I assumed were more updates from her increasingly paranoid boss. I waited until I heard the shower running, then went to my workshop and pulled out a small notebook. Time to document another successful lesson in consequences. Callum was learning that his actions had ripple effects he hadn't considered. Raina was learning that her carefully constructed lies were becoming harder to maintain. And I was learning that revenge, when properly planned and executed, could be deeply satisfying. But I was just getting started. The next phase required more delicate work. I'd been monitoring Raina's communications through a variety of methods, some technological, some social, some just good old-fashioned observation. She'd been using a second phone for her communications with Callum, a cheap burner phone that she thought was untraceable. She was wrong about that. The phone used a prepaid plan that could be tracked through cell tower data. More importantly, She'd been careless about where she used it, often making calls from our house or her office, places where I could monitor the signals with the right equipment. It took me 3 days to clone her burner phone and gain access to her message history. The conversations were exactly what I'd expected: arrangements for meetings, expressions of frustration about maintaining their secret, complaints about having to lie to their respective spouses. But there were also details that cut deeper than I'd prepared for: discussions about my shortcomings as a husband, jokes about my blue-collar background and lack of sophistication, plans for a future that didn't include me. I sat in my workshop at 2 a.m, reading through months of messages, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. This wasn't just an affair. This was a systematic dismantling of our marriage, complete with mockery and contempt for everything I'd thought we'd built together. Rena and Callum weren't just betraying me, they were laughing about it. That's when I stopped feeling guilty about what I was doing to them. The next morning I put Phase 3 into motion. Rena had a business trip scheduled for the following week, a marketing conference in Chicago that would keep her away for 3 days. Or at least, that's what she'd told me. According to her real phone records, she'd be spending those 3 days at a resort in the mountains with Callum, far from any marketing conference. I decided to make their romantic getaway a little more challenging. Using her cloned phone, I sent a series of messages to Callum, canceling their plans and suggesting they meet at a different location instead. Then, I used his access codes to book them a room at a budget motel on the outskirts of town, the kind of place that rented rooms by the hour and didn't ask questions about credit card names. When Rena left for her business trip, she was actually heading for 3 days of humiliation and confusion, wondering why her sophisticated lover had suddenly developed such poor taste in accommodations. But that was just the opening move. While she was gone, I had access to her home office, her personal computer, and all the physical evidence of her double life that she'd thought was safely hidden. I found printed emails, receipts from restaurants and hotels, even a spare keycard from one of their regular meeting places. I photographed everything, creating a comprehensive record of their affair that would be impossible to deny or explain away. Then, I put everything back exactly where I'd found it, leaving no trace of my investigation. When Rena returned from her conference, she was in a foul mood. The mountain resort had been a disaster. Their reservation had been mysteriously changed to a seedy motel. Callum had blamed her for the mix-up, and they'd spent most of the trip arguing about whose fault it was. "How was Chicago?" I asked, helping her carry her suitcase upstairs. "Frustrating. The hotel was terrible, the conference was poorly organized, and I barely learned anything useful." "That's too bad. Maybe next time you should do more research before booking." She shot me a look that could have stripped paint, but I just smiled and asked if she wanted me to make dinner. That night, while she was in the shower, her phone buzzed with a text message from Callum. I glanced at the screen and saw a preview of his message. "We need to talk about what happened this weekend. Something's not right." He was starting to figure it out. Good. Paranoia would make the next phase even more effective. I had spent years being the reliable husband, the man who fixed things quietly and never caused trouble. But reliability could be a weapon when used correctly. Predictability could be turned into a trap. Rena and Callum had made the mistake of thinking they were smarter than me, more sophisticated, better at playing games. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The real fun was just beginning. Over the next week, I escalated the psychological pressure on both of them. Small things, mostly. Technical glitches that could be explained away individually, but created a pattern of frustration and confusion when taken together. Callum's office computer developed a habit of freezing during important presentations. His parking garage keycard worked intermittently, sometimes trapping him in the building for hours. His favorite restaurant kept losing his reservation, despite repeated confirmations. Rena's problems were more subtle but equally maddening. Her corporate credit card was declined at inconvenient moments. Her presentation files became corrupted the night before important meetings. Her car's GPS system developed a tendency to route her through construction zones and traffic jams. Neither of them could prove that these incidents were connected, but both of them were starting to crack under the pressure. Their secret communications became increasingly paranoid, full of accusations and suspicions about who might be targeting them. They were so focused on looking for external enemies that they never considered the possibility that the threat was coming from inside their own circle. From the husband they dismissed as too simple to be dangerous. I was patient, methodical, building toward something bigger. Each small victory taught me more about their weaknesses, their fears, their breaking points. I was mapping their psychology the same way I'd map an engine's electrical system, looking for the critical connections that would allow me to control the whole mechanism. And I was discovering that I had a talent for this kind of work. 23 years of marriage had taught me exactly which buttons to push to get the maximum response. 20 years of running a business had taught me how to plan complex operations and execute them flawlessly. Most importantly, a lifetime of being underestimated had taught me how to hide in plain sight, how to strike without warning, how to destroy someone's world while smiling and asking if they needed help. Raina and Callum thought they were playing a sophisticated game of deception and manipulation, but they were amateurs, fumbling around in territory where I was becoming an expert. Soon, it would be time to show them the difference between their clumsy betrayal and my precise, calculated revenge. But first, I needed to gather one more piece of information. Something that would turn their affair from a private humiliation into a public catastrophe. Something that would make sure everyone they knew understood exactly what kind of people they really were. I smiled and went back to work on Mrs. Henderson's Buick. After all, I was still Brooks, the reliable mechanic, Brooks, the helpful neighbor, Brooks, the devoted husband, at least until I decided to be someone else entirely. The key to destroying someone's life isn't violence or dramatic confrontation. It's information, properly weaponized and deployed at exactly the right moment. I'd spent weeks gathering intelligence on Raina and Callum, building a comprehensive picture of their affair and the network of lies that supported it. Now, it was time to start sharing that information with the right people. I began with Bethany Sachs, Raina's best friend and the HR director at her company. Bethany was the kind of woman who collected secrets like other people collected stamps, always eager to be the first to know about office scandals and personal dramas. She was also fiercely loyal to Raina, which made her both a valuable ally and a potential threat. The approach had to be subtle. Direct accusations would make her defensive and protective. But carefully planted doubts, supported by just enough evidence to seem credible, could turn her into an unwitting accomplice in my campaign. I arranged to accidentally encounter Bethany at the coffee shop near Raina's office, timing my arrival to coincide with her usual afternoon break. She was sitting alone at a corner table, scrolling through her phone with the focused intensity of someone managing multiple crises simultaneously. Bethany, Brooks Carven, Raina's husband, we met at the Christmas party. She looked up, her expression shifting from annoyance at being interrupted to polite recognition. "Oh, hi, Brooks. How are you?" "Good, thanks. Mind if I sit? I was hoping to get your advice about something." She gestured to the empty chair across from her, curiosity overriding her desire to be left alone. Bethany couldn't resist the prospect of being consulted about a problem, especially one that might involve inside information. "What's going on?" I settled into the chair and arranged my expression into something between confusion and concern. "It's probably nothing, but I'm worried about Raina. She's been working such long hours lately, and she seems stressed about something she won't talk about." "The Henderson account has been demanding," Bethany said carefully, "and the quarterly reviews are coming up. It's a busy time for everyone." "Right, that makes sense. It's just—" I paused, as if debating whether to continue. "She's been getting a lot of calls from Callum outside of normal business hours. Late night, weekends, that sort of thing. Is that normal for your company?" Something flickered in Bethany's eyes. Not surprise exactly, but recognition. She'd noticed something too. "Callum is very hands-on with his senior staff," she said, but her tone was more guarded now. "I'm sure he is. Raina speaks very highly of him. Says he's been mentoring her, helping her advance her career." I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "Between you and me, I think she might have a bit of a crush on him. You know how it is when someone admires their boss." Bethany's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. She was protective of Raina, but she was also a woman who understood the dynamics of office politics and the dangers of getting too close to powerful men. "Has she said something specific?" she asked. "Not directly, but she talks about him constantly, quotes his advice, mentions how much time they spend together working on projects. Last week she came home with his cologne on her clothes." I shrugged, as if dismissing my own concerns. "Like I said, it's probably nothing. I just don't want her to get hurt if she's reading more into their professional relationship than she should." I could see Bethany processing this information, connecting it to things she'd observed at work. The late meetings, the closed-door conferences, the way Callum and Raina interacted during company events. Pieces of a puzzle she'd been unconsciously collecting for months. "I'm sure it's just work," she said, but she didn't sound convinced. "You're probably right. Thanks for listening, though. It helps to talk to someone who knows the situation." I left her sitting there, staring into her coffee cup and thinking about everything she'd seen but hadn't quite acknowledged. By evening, she'd be paying closer attention to Raina and Callum's interactions. By the end of the week, she'd be noticing patterns that confirmed her growing suspicions. And once Bethany started talking to other people in the office, the whisper campaign would begin on its own. The next phase required more direct action. I'd been monitoring Callum's schedule through his social media posts and corporate calendar, looking for the right opportunity to escalate our personal conflict. He had a habit of working late on Thursday nights, staying in the office until 8 or 9 to prepare for Friday morning meetings. This Thursday, I decided to pay him a visit. The executive parking garage was nearly empty when I arrived at 7:30. Callum's Porsche sat in its reserved spot, still bearing the scratches from our last encounter. He'd had the hydraulic door system repaired, but I could see that he'd also installed a small security camera on his dashboard, insurance against future malfunctions. Too bad the camera wouldn't help him with what I had planned. I waited in the shadows until I heard the elevator doors open and saw Callum walking toward his car, briefcase in hand, phone pressed to his ear. He was talking to someone about quarterly projections, his voice carrying the confident authority of a man who thought he controlled his environment. He was about to learn otherwise. "Callum," I called out, stepping into the light. He stopped abruptly, nearly dropping his phone. "Brooks, what are you doing here?" "We need to talk." He glanced around the empty garage, probably calculating his options. He was taller than me and probably 20 pounds heavier, but he had the soft look of a man who got his exercise from a personal trainer rather than physical labor. More importantly, he had the cautious demeanor of someone who'd been experiencing too many unexplained problems lately. "About what?" "About my wife, and your habit of giving her hotel key cards." His face went pale, but he tried to maintain his composure. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Sure you do." I pulled the key card from my pocket, the same one he'd pressed into my palm at the awards gala. "Room 1247, remember? You were so proud of yourself that night, letting me know about your little arrangement." "That was a misunderstanding. I was just—" "You were just what? Accidentally giving me your hotel room key? Accidentally having an affair with my wife?" "Which part was the accident, Callum?" He straightened up, trying to project authority. "Look, Brooks, I think you're confused about the situation. Raina and I work closely together, but it's strictly professional." I laughed, the sound echoing off the concrete walls. "Professional. Right. Is that what you call those weekend trips to mountain resorts? Professional development?" The color drained completely from his face. He hadn't expected me to know about that. How did I know? Because I'm not as stupid as you think I am. Because I pay attention when my wife lies to me. Because I know how to use a computer and a GPS tracker and basic surveillance techniques. I stepped closer, and he instinctively backed toward his car. Because I'm tired of being treated like an idiot by people who think they're smarter than me. This is between you and Raina, he said, his voice rising. Leave me out of your marriage problems. You made it my problem when you started screwing my wife. You made it personal when you handed me that keycard with that smug little smile. You wanted me to know, didn't you? You wanted me to understand that you'd won. He was pressed against his car now, trapped between the Porsche and my advancing presence. I never meant for it to happen, it just what? It just accidentally happened dozens of times over several months? You just accidentally booked hotel rooms and made dinner reservations and sent her flowers at the office? His mouth opened and closed without sound. He'd been caught, and we both knew it. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You're going to end this thing with my wife. You're going to transfer her to a different department or find some other way to minimize your contact. And you're going to stop playing games with hotel keycards and mysterious technical problems. You can't prove I did anything wrong, he said, but his voice shook. I don't have to prove anything. I just have to make your life unpleasant enough that you decide my wife isn't worth the trouble. I smiled, and something in my expression made him flinch. Trust me, Callum. You don't want to find out how creative I can get when someone threatens my family. I turned to walk away, then paused and looked back. Oh, and Callum, you might want to check your car before you drive home. These parking garages can be dangerous places. Lots of opportunities for accidents. I left him there, fumbling for his keys with shaking hands, probably wondering what I'd done to his precious Porsche this time. The answer was nothing. But he'd spend the next hour checking every system, looking under the hood, examining the tires, searching for problems that didn't exist. Paranoia was often more effective than actual sabotage. When I got home, Raina was waiting in the kitchen, her face tight with anger. What did you say to Callum? I opened the refrigerator and pulled out a beer, taking my time with the answer. We had a conversation about boundaries and professional behavior. Why? He called me, Brooks. He's upset about something you said to him. Really? What did he tell you I said? She hesitated, probably realizing that any specific details would reveal more about their relationship than she wanted to admit. He said you confronted him about working late with me. I did. I told him I was concerned about my wife spending so much time alone with her boss after hours. Seemed like a reasonable concern for a husband to have. It's not what you think. What do I think, Raina? She stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her trying to work out how much I knew, how much I suspected, how much trouble she was in. Finally, she shook her head and headed for the stairs. I'm going to bed. We'll talk about this tomorrow. Looking forward to it. But we both knew there wouldn't be much talking. The pretense was breaking down, and soon we'd have to deal with the reality of what our marriage had become. I finished my beer and went down to my workshop, where I pulled out my notebook and added another entry to my growing record of their affair. Tomorrow, I'd start phase 4 of my campaign. The evidence gathering was complete, the psychological pressure was building, and both Raina and Callum were starting to crack under the strain. It was time to go public with what I'd learned. Time to make sure everyone in their professional and social circles understood exactly what kind of people they were dealing with. Time to destroy their reputations the same way they'd destroyed my marriage. I opened my computer and began composing the first of several anonymous emails that would be sent to carefully selected recipients over the next few days. Each message would contain just enough information to be credible, just enough detail to be damaging, and just enough ambiguity to be impossible to trace back to me. By the time I was finished, Raina and Callum would discover that secrets have a way of spreading like wildfire once the right person strikes the match. And I was very good at striking matches. The beauty of a well-orchestrated campaign is that once it reaches critical mass, it becomes self-sustaining. People love gossip, especially when it involves successful people behaving badly. All I had to do was provide the initial spark, and human nature would take care of the rest. I started with Bethany, who had been watching Raina and Callum with new eyes since our coffee shop conversation. A single anonymous email to her personal account, containing photos of them entering and leaving hotels together, was enough to confirm her growing suspicions and trigger her need to share the information with trusted colleagues. Within 48 hours, the Whisper campaign had spread through Raina's entire department. By the end of the week, it had reached the executive floor and the HR department. By the following Monday, even the security guards were talking about the marketing director who was sleeping with her boss. But I wasn't content to limit the damage to their professional lives. Callum's wife, Patricia, received a carefully crafted package containing hotel receipts, restaurant bills, and photographs that told the story of her husband's affair in devastating detail. I included a note expressing sympathy for her situation and suggesting she might want to consult with a divorce attorney about protecting her assets. Raina's mother got a different package, filled with evidence of her daughter's lies about working late and traveling for business. Gloria had always been protective of family reputation, and the thought of her daughter destroying a marriage for a cheap affair would eat at her like acid. Maya, my own daughter, didn't need any evidence from me. She'd already figured out what was happening, and her teenage sense of justice made her a natural ally in my campaign against her mother's deception. "Dad," she said one evening, finding me in my workshop, "Mom's been getting weird phone calls all day. She keeps going outside to talk." "Probably work stuff," I said, not looking up from the engine I was rebuilding. "It's not work. She's crying." I set down my wrench and looked at my daughter. At 17, Maya had inherited her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's ability to see through lies. She knew exactly what was happening, and she was angry about it. "How are you handling all this?" I asked. She shrugged, but I could see the hurt in her eyes. "I'm not surprised. She's been acting weird for months. I just didn't think she'd be stupid enough to get caught." "Your mother's not stupid, Maya. She just made some bad choices. She made choices that hurt you, that hurt our family." Maya's voice was fierce with loyalty. "I don't care if she's my mother. What she did was wrong." I pulled my daughter into a hug, feeling the weight of her support and the responsibility that came with it. Maya was choosing sides in a war she hadn't started, and I needed to make sure her loyalty to me didn't destroy her relationship with her mother permanently. "Whatever happens between your mom and me, she's still your mother. Don't let my problems with her change that." "But Dad—" "No buts. Adults make mistakes, sometimes big ones. But that doesn't mean you have to choose between us." She nodded, but I could see she'd already made her choice. Maya was going to be my ally in whatever came next, whether I wanted her to be or not. The pressure on Raina and Callum was building from multiple directions now. At work, they were dealing with knowing looks and whispered conversations. At home, they were facing suspicious spouses and disappointed family members. Their secret affair had become the worst-kept secret in their social and professional circles. Callum cracked first. He called me on a Tuesday morning, his voice tight with desperation and barely controlled anger. "We need to meet," he said without preamble. "Do we?" "You know we do. This has gone far enough." I pretended to consider his request. "All right. You know Murphy's bar on 5th Street? Meet me there at 8 tonight." Murphy's was Kev's place, a neighborhood bar that catered to blue-collar workers and longtime locals. It was exactly the kind of place that would make Callum uncomfortable, surrounded by people who would see right through his corporate polish and expensive suit. I arrived early and claimed a corner booth where I could watch the door. Kev, my best friend since high school and the bar's owner, brought me a beer without being asked. "Expecting trouble?" he asked, noting my choice of seating. Maybe. Guy I'm meeting has been causing problems for me. Might need you to keep an eye on things. Kev nodded. He was an ex-cop who'd bought the bar with his pension money, and he had a talent for reading situations and managing difficult customers. If Callum tried to cause problems, he'd find himself dealing with more than just me. Callum arrived 20 minutes late, probably hoping to make some kind of power play with his tardiness. He looked around the bar with obvious distaste, taking in the worn vinyl booths, the neon beer signs, and the working-class clientele who were watching him with undisguised curiosity. He slid into the booth across from me, his expensive suit looking out of place among the flannel shirts and work boots. "This is a charming place," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "It's honest, something you might not be familiar with." His jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. "I want this to stop, Brooks. Whatever game you're playing, whatever you think you're accomplishing, it ends now." "What game is that, Callum?" "Don't play dumb. The emails, the photos, the harassment. I know it's you." I took a sip of my beer, letting him wait for my response. "You know, that's interesting. You're accusing me of harassment, but I haven't done anything illegal. I haven't threatened you, haven't touched you, haven't damaged your property. All I've done is share some information with people who had a right to know about it. You've destroyed my marriage, my career, my reputation." "No, Callum. You did that when you decided to have an affair with my wife. I just made sure people found out about it." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "You have no idea who you're messing with. I have connections, resources. I can make your life very difficult." I smiled and gestured around the bar. "Look around, Callum. This is my world. These are my people. You think your corporate connections scare me? You think your money and your influence matter here?" As if summoned by my words, Kev appeared at our table with a fresh beer for me and a hard stare for Callum. "Everything okay here, Brooks?" "Fine, Kev. My friend here was just telling me about his connections." Kev looked Callum up and down with the practiced eye of someone who'd spent years dealing with troublemakers. "Connections, huh? That's nice. You know what I've got? 30 years on the force, a bar full of regulars who don't like outsiders causing problems, and a very low tolerance for people who threaten my friends." Callum's face flushed, but he had enough sense to recognize a losing situation. "I'm not threatening anyone. I'm just trying to have a conversation." "Good," Kev said. "Keep it that way." He walked away, but I could see him keeping an eye on our table from behind the bar. "Here's the thing, Callum," I said, my voice conversational again. "You're used to getting your way through intimidation and corporate politics, but this isn't a boardroom, and I'm not one of your employees. You can't fire me, you can't transfer me, and you can't make me disappear with a phone call to HR. What do you want?" "I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I want you to realize that when you mess with someone's family, they might just mess back. And I want you to know that this is just the beginning." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I've been very restrained so far. A few emails, some photos, a little social embarrassment. But I've got months of evidence about your affair, detailed records of your lies and deceptions, and a very creative imagination when it comes to sharing information with the right people." I leaned forward, matching his earlier posture. "Your wife's divorce attorney is going to love the financial records I've compiled. The IRS might be interested in those business trips you claimed as company expenses when you were actually taking my wife to romantic getaways. And I'm sure the board of directors would be fascinated to learn how you've been using company resources to conduct your personal affairs." The color drained from his face. "You're bluffing." "Am I? You want to find out?" He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him trying to calculate his options. Finally, he shook his head and started to slide out of the booth. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes, it is. You just don't know it yet." He walked toward the door, trying to maintain some dignity despite the curious stares of the other customers. But his exit was interrupted when the door suddenly swung shut in front of him, the electronic lock engaging with a loud click. Callum pulled on the handle, but the door wouldn't budge. He looked back at me with a mixture of confusion and growing panic. "Kev," I called out. "Something's wrong with your door." "Yeah, the electronic lock's been acting up lately. Probably need to call a repair guy." Kev walked over and examined the door with exaggerated concern. "Might take a while to get someone out here at this time of night." Callum was trapped, standing by the locked door while every person in the bar watched him with amusement. His face was red with embarrassment and frustration. "This is ridiculous," he said. "Just open the door." "Can't do it manually," Kev explained. "Safety feature. Once the electronic system engages, you need the override code to release it. So use the override code. Would if I could remember it. Like I said, system's been acting up. Might take me a few minutes to figure it out." I finished my beer and stood up, walking over to where Callum was standing. "You know, this reminds me of something. Didn't you have some trouble with electronic locks a few weeks ago? Hotel room, office building, parking garage? Funny how these things seem to follow you around." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You did this." "Did what? I'm just a simple mechanic, remember? I don't know anything about electronic security systems." Kev suddenly snapped his fingers. "Oh, right, I remember the code now." He walked behind the bar and pressed a few buttons on a control panel. The door lock disengaged with an audible click. Callum yanked the door open and fled into the night without another word. The bar erupted in laughter and applause. Kev brought me another beer and refused to let me pay for it. "That was beautiful," he said. "Who was that clown?" "My wife's boss, the one I told you about." "Ah, the guy who's been causing problems. Well, I don't think he'll be back anytime soon." I stayed for another hour, enjoying the company of people who understood loyalty and consequences. When I finally headed home, I felt better than I had in months. But the evening's entertainment was just a preview of what was coming. Callum had tried to intimidate me and failed. Now he'd be even more desperate, more willing to take risks, more likely to make the kind of mistakes that would give me the opening I needed for the final phase of my campaign. Raina was waiting when I got home, her face streaked with tears and her hands shaking with anger. "What did you do to him?" she demanded. "We had a conversation about boundaries and respect. He seemed to understand my point of view." "He's talking about going to the police, Brooks. He says you've been stalking him, harassing him." "Really? That's interesting. What crime does he think I've committed?" She stared at me, and I could see her trying to work out the legal implications of Callum's accusations. Adultery wasn't illegal, but neither was sharing truthful information about someone's behavior. I'd been very careful to stay within the bounds of the law, even as I'd systematically destroyed their secret affair. "This has to stop," she said finally. "What has to stop, Raina? Your affair? Your lies? Your complete disrespect for our marriage and family?" "I never meant for this to happen." "But it did happen. For months, apparently. And you were content to let it continue as long as you thought I was too stupid to figure it out." She collapsed into a chair, her composure finally cracking completely. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can't fix it. You can only decide what you want to do next." "What do you mean?" I looked at my wife, really looked at her, and tried to find some trace of the woman I'd married 23 years ago. But all I saw was a stranger who'd been living in my house, sharing my bed, and lying to my face while she conducted her affair with a man who thought I was beneath his notice. I mean, you need to decide if you want to try to save what's left of our marriage, or if you want to keep pretending that you can have both me and him. I ended it with Callum. After everything that's happened, after all the problems, I told him it was over. "When?" "Tonight, after he called me about your meeting at the bar." I nodded, unsurprised. Callum was cutting his losses, abandoning the affair now that it had become more trouble than it was worth. But that didn't change what had already happened, or the months of deception that had led to this moment. "Good," I said. "That's a start. So what happens now?" I looked at her for a long moment. This woman who'd shared my life for more than 2 decades, who'd borne my daughter, who'd promised to love and honor me for as long as we were together. The woman who'd thrown all of that away for a few months of excitement with her boss. "Now we see if there's anything left worth saving," I said. But even as I spoke the words, I knew the answer. Some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal. Some trust, once lost, could never be recovered. Raina had made her choice months ago when she started her affair. Now I was making mine. The war wasn't over. It was just entering its final phase. 3 weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. Raina had indeed ended her affair with Callum, but the damage to our marriage felt irreversible. We moved around each other like polite strangers, maintaining the basic courtesies of shared living space, while avoiding any real conversation about our future. Maya watched us both with the sharp awareness of a teenager who understood that her family was dissolving but couldn't do anything to stop it. She'd grown closer to me during this period, often spending evenings in my workshop while I worked on cars, and she did homework at an old desk I'd set up for her. "Are you and Mom getting divorced?" she asked one night, her voice carefully neutral. I looked up from the transmission I was rebuilding. "I don't know yet. That's a decision we both have to make. She's miserable, you know, crying all the time, barely eating." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Are you?" "Sorry, I mean." I set down my tools and really looked at my daughter. She deserved honesty, even if the truth was complicated and painful. "I'm sorry that our problems are affecting you. I'm sorry that your mother made choices that hurt our family. But am I sorry that she's facing consequences for those choices?" "No, Maya. I'm not sorry about that." She nodded, accepting my answer with the matter-of-fact pragmatism that had always impressed me about her generation. "What about Callum? Is he miserable too?" That question made me smile, though there wasn't much humor in it. "I imagine he is. His wife filed for divorce last week, and the company is conducting an internal investigation into his conduct. He's probably going to lose his job." "Good," Maya said with fierce satisfaction. "He deserves whatever he gets." I was about to respond when my phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message was brief and to the point. "We need to meet. Tonight. Old warehouse on River Street. Come alone. B. Bethany Sachs." I'd been wondering when she would surface. Bethany had been conspicuously quiet since the affair became public knowledge, avoiding both Raina and the office gossip that had consumed their workplace. But I'd suspected she knew more about the situation than she'd let on, and apparently she was finally ready to talk. "I have to go out for a while," I told Maya. "Everything okay?" "Just some business I need to take care of. I'll be back later." The warehouse district by the river had been abandoned for years, a collection of empty buildings that the city kept promising to redevelop but never quite got around to. It was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting, isolated and private, with plenty of ways in and out if things went wrong. I arrived early and parked where I could watch the main entrance. Bethany's car pulled up exactly at the appointed time, and she got out looking nervous but determined. She was dressed casually, which was unusual for her, and she kept glancing around as if she expected to be followed. I met her at the entrance to the main warehouse building, an old brick structure with broken windows and graffiti-covered walls. "Thanks for coming," she said. "You said we needed to talk. About what?" "About Raina and Callum, about what really happened." She led me inside the building, where she'd set up a small camping lantern on an old crate. The light cast strange shadows on the walls, giving the whole scene an appropriately dramatic atmosphere for whatever revelation she was planning. "I know you think you understand what happened," she began, "but you don't have the whole story." Then tell me. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for a confession. The affair wasn't Raina's idea. It wasn't even Callum's idea. It was mine. I stared at her, processing this unexpected twist. What do you mean? I orchestrated the whole thing. I pushed them together, created opportunities for them to be alone, encouraged Raina to see Callum as more than just her boss. I wanted them to have an affair. Why? Because I wanted to destroy them both. Her voice was bitter now, filled with years of resentment and carefully hidden anger. Raina, with her perfect marriage and perfect career, always looking down on the rest of us. Callum, with his arrogance and his assumption that he could treat people however he wanted without consequences. What did they do to you? Callum fired my husband 3 years ago. Tom was a good employee, loyal, hard-working, but he made the mistake of questioning one of Callum's decisions in a meeting. Callum destroyed his career, made sure he couldn't get another job in the industry. We lost our house, our savings, everything. The pieces were starting to fall into place. And Raina? Raina knew what Callum had done to Tom. She could have stood up for him, could have used her influence to help. Instead, she stayed quiet because she didn't want to risk her own position. She chose her career over doing the right thing. Bethany's eyes glittered with malice in the lantern light. So, I decided to make them both pay. I spent 2 years planning it, watching for the right opportunity. When I saw how Raina looked at Callum during company events, I knew I had my chance. You manipulated them into having an affair. I created the conditions. I made sure they had reasons to work late together, arranged for them to travel to the same conferences, even suggested that Raina might benefit from private mentoring sessions with him. I planted seeds and let their own weaknesses do the rest. I had to admire the sophistication of her revenge, even as I felt disgusted by the manipulation involved. And then what? You were just going to watch them destroy themselves? That was the plan. But then you started your own campaign against them, and everything accelerated beyond what I'd expected. You were so much more effective than I thought you'd be. You've been watching me. Of course, I had to make sure you didn't discover my role in all this. I was prepared to intervene if necessary, to redirect your anger back toward them if you got too close to the truth. But I never got close to the truth, did I? I was so focused on their betrayal that I never looked for the puppet master pulling the strings. She smiled, and there was genuine pride in her expression. You were very good, Brooks. Much better than I expected. The way you systematically destroyed their affair, their reputations, their sense of security, it was almost artistic. Almost? You made one mistake. You let emotion drive your actions instead of pure calculation. You wanted them to know you were responsible, wanted them to understand that they'd underestimated you. That need for recognition made you sloppy. I thought about my confrontations with Callum, my increasingly bold moves against both him and Raina. She was right. I'd let my anger and wounded pride push me toward direct confrontation when subtlety would have been more effective. So what happens now? I asked. Now you have a choice. You can expose me, tell Raina and Callum that they were manipulated into their affair by someone seeking revenge. That might even give them a chance to salvage something from the wreckage of their lives. Or you can keep my secret, and we can finish what we started together. I have one more surprise for your wife, something that will complete her destruction, but I need your help to pull it off. I stared at her. This woman I'd barely known who had orchestrated the destruction of my marriage for her own purposes. Part of me was horrified by the calculating coldness of her revenge, but another part of me was impressed by her patience, her planning, her willingness to play a long game for the ultimate payoff. What kind of surprise? She reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope. DNA test results. I had them run on a sample of Maya's hair that I collected from Raina's car, compared against a sample from Callum that I obtained from his coffee cup. My heart stopped. What are you saying? I'm saying that your daughter isn't your daughter, Brooks. She's Callum's. Raina's affair wasn't the beginning of their relationship. It was a resumption of something that started 18 years ago. The envelope felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hands. I stared at it, afraid to open it, afraid to see the truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. You're lying. Open it and see for yourself. With trembling fingers, I broke the seal and pulled out the laboratory report. The scientific language was dry and clinical, but the conclusion was unmistakable. There was a 99.7% probability that Callum Torvin was Maya's biological father. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family, all of it was built on a lie that went back nearly 2 decades. How long have you known? I asked. I suspected for months, but I only had the test done last week. Maya looks like Callum when you know what to look for. The same eyes, the same facial structure. Raina was very good at hiding it, but the resemblance is there. I sank down onto a nearby crate, the weight of this revelation crushing down on me. Maya, my brilliant, loyal daughter, wasn't mine. The child I'd raised, the person I'd loved more than anyone else in the world, was the product of my wife's deception and betrayal. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to use it. This is the ultimate weapon against both of them. Imagine Raina's face when she realizes that her deepest secret has been exposed. Imagine Callum's reaction when he discovers he has a daughter he never knew about. Maya doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. Maya is already in the middle of it. She's been living a lie her entire life. Don't you think she has a right to know the truth about who she really is? I looked at the DNA report again, trying to process the implications. This wasn't just about my marriage anymore. This was about Maya's identity, her sense of self, her relationship with both of her parents. What exactly are you proposing? A final confrontation. All of us together, you, me, Raina, Callum, and Maya. Let's put all the cards on the table and see who's left standing when the truth comes out. That's insane. It would destroy Maya. Maya is stronger than you think, and she deserves to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I stood up and walked to one of the broken windows, looking out at the dark river beyond. Everything I'd thought I was fighting for, my marriage, my family, my sense of justice, had been built on foundations that were crumbling beneath my feet. Where would this confrontation take place? The old family house on Elm Street, the one where you and Raina lived when you were first married. It's been empty since your mother-in-law moved to the assisted living facility, but I have keys. How do you have keys? I helped Gloria with the estate planning. She gave me a set in case of emergencies. Of course she did. Bethany had been planning this for years, positioning herself to have access to everything she needed for her ultimate revenge. And you want to do this when? Tomorrow night. I'll make sure everyone is there. Raina thinks she's meeting me to discuss damage control for her career. Callum thinks he's meeting her to discuss their legal exposure from the affair. Maya. She paused, looking at me. Maya will come if you ask her to. I turned back to face her. This woman who had manipulated all of us like pieces on a chessboard, who had orchestrated the destruction of multiple lives for her own satisfaction. And what do you get out of this? Justice, closure, the satisfaction of watching them face the full consequences of their actions. What about Maya? What does she get out of learning that her entire life has been a lie? She gets the truth. And the truth, no matter how painful, is better than living a lie. I looked at the DNA report one more time, then folded it and put it in my jacket pocket. I need time to think about this. You have until tomorrow evening. But Brooks? She picked up her lantern and prepared to leave. This is your chance to finish what you started, to make sure that everyone who betrayed you faces the full consequences of their actions. Don't let emotion or misplaced loyalty stop you from seeing this through to the end. She walked away, leaving me alone in the dark warehouse with the weight of this new knowledge pressing down on me like a physical force. Maya wasn't my daughter. Everything I'd thought I was fighting for was built on a lie, and tomorrow night I would have to decide whether to expose that lie and destroy what remained of my family, or let the truth stay buried and live with the knowledge of what I'd lost. I drove home through empty streets, my mind racing with the implications of what I'd learned. When I got to the house, Maya was waiting up for me, sitting at the kitchen table with her homework spread out in front of her. "How was your meeting?" she asked. I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to see Callum's features in her face. Now that I knew what to look for, the resemblance was unmistakable. The shape of her eyes, the line of her jaw, even the way she held her head when she was concentrating. How had I never noticed before? "It was enlightening," I said. "Dad, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." In a way, I had. I'd seen the ghost of the life I thought I'd been living, the family I thought I'd built, the daughter I thought was mine. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." "Okay. Well, I'm going to bed. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, Maya." She kissed my cheek and headed upstairs, leaving me alone with my devastating knowledge and an impossible choice. Tomorrow night, everything would come to an end. One way or another, the truth would finally be revealed, and whatever remained of my family would have to face the consequences of decades of lies and deception. I just wasn't sure any of us would survive it. The next evening arrived with the inevitability of a funeral. I'd spent the day in my workshop, trying to lose myself in the familiar routine of mechanical work, but my hands shook every time I thought about what was coming. At 6 o'clock, I found Maya in her room, getting ready to go out with friends. "Change of plans," I said. "I need you to come somewhere with me." "Where?" "Grandma Gloria's old house. There are some things we need to discuss as a family." Something in my tone made her look up sharply. "What kind of things?" "Important things. Things that are going to change everything." She studied my face, and I could see her trying to read the situation. "Is this about Mom's affair?" "Among other things." "Dad, you're scaring me." I sat down on her bed and took her hands in mine. "Maya, I want you to know that no matter what happens tonight, no matter what you learn about our family, I love you. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and nothing will ever change that." "Now you're really scaring me." "I'm sorry, but you need to hear this from me, and you need to be prepared for some difficult truths." "What kind of truths?" I looked into her eyes, Callum's eyes, and felt my heart breaking. "The kind that change everything you thought you knew about who you are." We drove to the old house in silence, Maya staring out the window with growing apprehension. When we arrived, I could see that Bethany had been busy. The lights were on, and I could see figures moving around inside. "Whose car is that?" Maya asked, pointing to Callum's Porsche parked in the driveway. "Your mother's boss. The man she was having an affair with." "Why is he here?" "Because this involves him too." We walked to the front door, and I could hear voices from inside, Raina and Callum arguing about something, their words muffled by the walls. I took a deep breath and opened the door. The living room had been set up like a courtroom, with chairs arranged in a circle around a coffee table where Bethany had placed several manila envelopes. Raina and Callum were standing on opposite sides of the room, both looking confused and angry. "Brooks," Raina said when she saw me. "What's going on?" "Bethany said you wanted to meet here to discuss the truth," I interrupted. "All of it. No more lies, no more secrets, no more deception." Callum stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "I'm not staying for this. Whatever game you're playing. Sit down, Callum." Bethany's voice cut through his protest like a blade. "Trust me. You want to hear what we have to say?" "Who put you in charge?" he demanded. "I did." She smiled, and there was something predatory in her expression. After all, this was my idea from the beginning. The room went silent. Raina looked confused. Maya looked frightened, and Callum looked like he was beginning to understand that he'd walked into a trap. "What do you mean, your idea?" Raina asked. Bethany walked to the center of the circle, clearly enjoying her moment of revelation. "I mean that your affair wasn't a spontaneous romance. It was a carefully orchestrated manipulation designed to destroy both of your lives." "That's impossible," Callum said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Is it? Think about all those late meetings I scheduled for you two, all those conferences where you just happened to be staying at the same hotel, all those times I suggested that Raina might benefit from private mentoring sessions." Raina's face went pale. "You set us up. I created opportunities. You two did the rest all by yourselves." "But why?" Callum demanded. "Because you destroyed my husband's career and my family's life. Because Raina stood by and watched it happen without lifting a finger to help. Because both of you needed to learn that actions have consequences." I watched this exchange with a mixture of fascination and horror. Bethany was revealing her role with obvious satisfaction, enjoying the shock and confusion on their faces. "And Brooks?" Raina looked at me with dawning understanding. "You knew about this?" "I found out last night, just like I found out about a lot of other things." I pulled the DNA report from my jacket and set it on the coffee table. "Including this." Raina stared at the envelope like it was a snake coiled to strike. "What is that?" "Open it and see." With trembling hands, she picked up the envelope and pulled out the report. As she read it, the color drained completely from her face. "Oh God," she whispered. "What is it?" Maya asked, moving closer to her mother. Raina looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears and terror. "Brooks, please, not like this." "What is it, Mom?" Maya's voice was getting higher, more frightened. I took the report from Raina's hands and looked at my daughter, at Callum's daughter. "Maya, this is a DNA test. It shows that Callum is your biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. Maya stared at me, then at her mother, then at Callum, trying to process what she'd just heard. "That's impossible," she said finally. "I'm afraid it's not. Your mother and Callum had a relationship 18 years ago, before you were born. I never knew about it." Maya turned to face her mother, her expression a mixture of confusion and betrayal. "Is it true?" Raina was crying now, her composure completely shattered. "Maya, I'm so sorry. I never meant for you to find out like this." "But is it true?" "Yes," Raina whispered. "It's true." Maya looked at Callum, who was standing frozen in shock, staring at her as if seeing her for the first time. "You're my father?" she asked him. I didn't know," he stammered. "I had no idea." "But you knew about the affair 18 years ago," I said. "You knew there was a possibility." "It was one night," he said desperately. "One mistake. Raina told me she was on birth control. When she got pregnant, she said the baby was yours. And you just accepted that? Never wondered? Never asked for proof? I was married. I had my own life, my own family. I didn't want complications." Maya was staring at him with a mixture of disgust and fascination. "You didn't want complications, so you just walked away and let another man raise your child. I didn't know you were mine. You didn't want to know." The truth of that statement hung in the air, like poison gas. Callum had been content to let me raise his daughter as long as it didn't interfere with his comfortable life. "Maya," I said gently, "I want you to know that this doesn't change how I feel about you. You're still my daughter in every way that matters." She turned to look at me, and I could see her struggling with emotions too complex for anyone to handle, let alone a 17-year-old. "But I'm not really your daughter, am I? I'm his." She pointed at Callum with something approaching hatred. "I'm the daughter of the man who destroyed our family. You're the daughter I chose to raise and love for 17 years. Biology doesn't change that. Doesn't it?" She looked around the room at all of us. The mother who had lied to her, The biological father who had abandoned her, the man who had raised her under false pretenses, and the woman who had orchestrated this entire confrontation for her own revenge. "My entire life has been a lie," she said quietly. "Everything I thought I knew about who I am, where I come from, what my family is, all of it was fake." "Maya," Raina started. "Don't." Maya's voice was sharp with anger. "Don't say anything to me. You've lied to me every day of my life. You've lied to Dad. You've lied to everyone. I don't want to hear anything else from you." She turned to Callum. "And you. You're pathetic. You had a daughter and you just walked away because it was inconvenient. Well, congratulations. You missed 17 years of raising an amazing person because you were too selfish to take responsibility for your actions." Callum opened his mouth to respond, but Maya wasn't finished. "And now, after destroying our family with your affair, after humiliating my dad and breaking up your own marriage, you want to claim some kind of parental rights? You want to be my father, now that it's convenient? Maya, please. No, you don't get to be my father. You gave up that right 18 years ago when you decided that your comfortable life was more important than your child." She turned back to me, and I could see tears streaming down her face. "Dad, I need to get out of here. I can't deal with this right now." "Of course. Let's go home." "No, not home. I need to be somewhere else, somewhere that isn't connected to all these lies." I understood. The house, our family, everything she'd thought was real had been contaminated by the truth. She needed space to process what she'd learned. "Where do you want to go?" "Can I stay with Uncle Kev for a few days? Just until I figure out how to handle this?" "Of course." I looked around the room one more time, at Raina, still crying and broken, at Callum, standing in shock as he processed the reality of having a daughter he'd never known, at Bethany, watching the destruction she'd orchestrated with obvious satisfaction. "Are you happy now?" I asked Bethany. "Is this what you wanted?" "This is justice," she said. "Everyone finally knows the truth about what kind of people they really are." Including Maya, an innocent 17-year-old who didn't deserve to have her world destroyed for your revenge. She deserved to know the truth about her parentage. She deserved to have parents who put her welfare above their own selfish desires. Instead, she got all of us. I put my arm around Maya's shoulders and guided her toward the door. "Come on, sweetheart. Let's get you out of here." As we reached the doorway, Maya turned back to look at the wreckage of our family one more time. "I hope it was worth it," she said to the room in general. "I hope destroying each other was worth destroying me too." We walked out into the night, leaving behind the lies, the betrayals, and the people who had created them. Maya cried silently in the passenger seat as I drove her to Kev's bar, where she could find some peace away from the chaos of our family. "Dad?" she said as we pulled up to the bar. "Yeah?" "I meant what I said in there. You're still my father, no matter what that DNA test says. You're the one who raised me, who loved me, who was there for me. That's what matters." I felt tears stinging my own eyes. "Thank you, Maya. That means everything to me. But I need some time to figure out what this all means. For me, for us, for everything. Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready." She hugged me tightly, then got out of the car and walked into the bar where Kev would take care of her, protect her from the fallout of the adults who had failed her. I sat in my car for a long time, watching the neon sign flicker in the window, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The affair, the lies, the revenge, the manipulation, all of it had seemed so important, so justified, so necessary. But in the end, the only person who had really been hurt was Maya, the innocent victim of everyone else's selfishness and cruelty. I started the car and drove away, leaving behind the wreckage of my marriage, my family, and everything I'd thought I was fighting for. Tomorrow, I would have to figure out how to rebuild my life from the ashes of what I'd lost. But tonight, I just drove through the empty streets, listening to the sound of my own breathing and wondering if revenge had been worth the price we'd all paid for it. The answer, I knew, was no, but it was too late to change any of it now. The keycard to ruin had opened every door, and there was no way to lock them again.